On June 4, 1943, Naval Station Norfolk, Virginia, became the scene where Petty Officer Herman Butcher, stepping down a gangplank onto solid ground after a 2-week Atlantic crossing, encountered a reality that shattered Nazi myths. The morning fog lifted, revealing a sight utterly incompatible with 3 years of propaganda he had absorbed. White and African-American dock workers toiling side by side, futuristic machinery, women in work clothes operating cranes, and children offering newspapers at the entrance. No one showed fear or hostility at the sight of his German uniform. "These crazy Americans," Butcher mumbled, astonished by what he saw. This moment was deeply etched in his memory and later recorded in his 1952 memoir, Behind Barbed Wire, published in Germany, becoming one of the most comprehensive accounts of German prisoners of war's lives in America. The Norfolk Naval Station was astounding in its scale. 4,300 acres of land, docks stretching to the horizon, and dozens of ships simultaneously loading and unloading cargo with cranes. In a single morning, this port processed more goods than Hamburg did in an entire week. However, what struck the arriving prisoners was less the sheer size than the atmosphere of normalcy. Civilians moved freely across the military base, vendors offered coffee and donuts near warships, and a brass band played popular tunes at a war bond rally. On American soil stood 200 veterans of Field Marshal Rommel's Afrika Korps, the first large contingent of what would become 425,000 German POWs in the United States by the end of the war. In the ensuing months, the German POWs witnessed a spectacle that went far beyond the simple American abundance about which legends were already being told. They encountered a phenomenon that baffled their military minds, a nation engaged in a bloody war yet refusing to behave appropriately. American society, unshakably confident in its power, treated its mortal enemies with a hospitality befitting lost travelers. The strange customs and inexplicable behavior of the Americans proved more destructive to Nazi ideology than any defeat on the battlefield. The reception procedure in Norfolk began with what Oberleutnant Butcher later described in his memoirs as the first absurdity. German military doctrine applied unfailingly from Poland to France and Africa dictated that prisoners were either valuable resources to be exploited or burdens to be disposed of. The Geneva Convention was acknowledged only when convenient and cynically ignored otherwise. Here, American officers meticulously read the provisions of the Geneva Convention in fluent German, explaining rights and inquiring about prisoners' dietary needs. According to International Red Cross reports from June 1943, American servicemen, including several sergeants with distinctly Jewish surnames, distributed Red Cross parcels, emphasizing that kosher meals would be provided for Jewish prisoners. Some Wehrmacht soldiers chuckled awkwardly, believing it to be a sophisticated mockery. But it was not. The American war machine seriously intended to observe the religious dietary requirements of its enemies. Contrary to strict military logic, medical care for German POWs was provided at a level comparable to that for American soldiers. Wounded Wehrmacht soldiers received penicillin, a scarce commodity in German field hospitals, on par with American troops. Red Cross Inspector Guy Matro, in his July 1943 report, emphasized that the medical assistance provided to German POWs met or even exceeded the standards offered to American military personnel. It was surprising that African American medics serving in integrated units in Norfolk performed medical procedures on German officers. In one documented instance, a black medical technician drew blood from Wehrmacht officers for routine medical examinations. In Nazi Germany, such racial contact was unthinkable and legally prohibited. However, in American captivity, it became a standard military procedure. The most striking scene unfolded during the first meal. German prisoners were led into a mess hall where American sailors were already dining. The two groups, former enemies who had fought each other in fierce convoy battles, now ate in the same room. Americans and Germans, separated by only a few feet, received food from the same serving lines, and the quality of the meals was identical for all. The American sailors seemed to show little interest in their recent adversaries, more engrossed in a baseball game broadcast from the radio. The 3-day train journey to inland camps brought even greater cognitive dissonance. Unlike the secretive movement of prisoners in Germany, American authorities made no effort to conceal the POWs. The trains, consisting of comfortable passenger cars rather than freight wagons, made stops at regular stations where locals gathered to observe the proceedings. At Union Station in Washington, D.C., hundreds of people witnessed a scene captured in the station's June 1943 log. German prisoners watched American families seeing off soldiers departing for training camps. Wives said goodbye to husbands with public kisses, children waved flags, and teenagers enjoyed milkshakes in the station restaurant. Enemies and families stood on the same platform, separated only by windows and guards who seemed more concerned with regulating traffic than overseeing the prisoners. The trains passed through industrial areas that seemingly should have been camouflaged, hidden and protected. Yet, factories displayed their names in huge letters. The Glenn L. Martin aircraft plant in Baltimore showcased its parking lots, filled with workers' personal cars, directly visible from the train windows. The prisoners could count the B-26 bombers lined up, ready for deployment. There were no attempts at concealment, no paranoia about security, just American industry operating openly, in full view of its enemies. As the train sped through Pennsylvania, it revealed a panorama of coal mines and steel mills operating non-stop. The night horizon glowed crimson from blast furnaces that knew no respite. Workers' homes, each with its own garden rather than dreary barracks, stretched for miles around these industrial giants. Electric lights shone in every window, and radio antennas adorned the rooftops, symbolizing a connection to the world. At the station in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, as documented by the Pennsylvania Railroad, German officers witnessed a scene that astonished them. American workers, changing shifts, carried lunchboxes, sported leather shoes and wristwatches, and arrived at work in personal cars. According to Butcher's recollections, one worker, after eating half an apple, discarded it and took a fresh one from his lunchbox. Such a conspicuous waste of food bewildered the officers, who had personally seen their own soldiers fighting over scraps in Africa. Camp Hearn, located in Texas, opened in December 1942 on 720 acres near the town of Hearn in Robertson County. According to military archives, it was designed for 4,800 German POWs, whose living conditions surpassed what most of them had known in their civilian lives. The camp's construction and operation are thoroughly documented in reports from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and War Department archives held at the National Archives. The camp's infrastructure itself contradicted German notions of prisoner treatment. Wooden barracks were lit by electricity, not kerosene lamps. Indoor plumbing featured flush toilets and water heaters in every building. Individual beds came with mattresses, sheets and blankets, not straw mats. Recreation rooms offered ping-pong tables, musical instruments and libraries. Swiss inspector Emil Sandstrom noted in his August 1943 report, "Conditions at Camp Herne not only meet the requirements of the Geneva Convention, but exceed the living conditions many of these men knew in Germany. Within the walls of the POW camp, where every corner breathed tension and uncertainty, a unique picture of interaction between victors and vanquished unfolded. Lieutenant Colonel Cecil Stiles, the camp commander, whose military career is recorded in archives, greeted the newly arrived prisoners with a speech in German, demonstrating linguistic skills acquired during his university years. He clearly laid out the camp rules, but also announced an unprecedented decision. The prisoners would be granted significant self-governance within their zones. They were to elect representatives, organize activities, and manage their daily routines, subject only to general military requirements. This idea of self-governance offered to enemies caused surprise and suspicion, perceived either as a sign of weakness or a clever trap. The camp hospital, under monthly inspection by the International Red Cross, impressed with its equipment, surpassing many civilian hospitals in Germany. It featured X-ray machines, operating rooms, dental clinics, and a wide array of medications, including the latest wonder drug, penicillin. When POW Georg Gartner, who would famously become the last POW to surrender only in 1985, developed appendicitis in September 1943, he received immediate medical attention. Captain William Calhoun, an army surgeon from Dallas, performed the surgery within hours, assisted by German medical personnel from among the POWs. This case vividly demonstrated how, even amidst war and captivity, humanity and professionalism could transcend boundaries and ideological differences. The prisoners of war arriving in Texas camps encountered a reality that exceeded all their expectations. Yet, even the harsh conditions of war could not have prepared them for the sight of the camp canteen, a store where they could purchase goods with coupons earned from voluntary labor. The assortment of items was astonishing: cigarettes, chocolate, soap, stationery, musical instruments, and art supplies. The War Department, which authorized these sales and documented them in Quartermaster Corps reports, believed that small comforts would help maintain prisoner morale and reduce the likelihood of escapes. The very idea that enemy soldiers could shop, choose goods, and possess more than just means for survival seemed incredible to the military mindset. By September 1943, a severe labor shortage led to prisoners of war being deployed for work across Texas. The War Manpower Commission, acting in conjunction with the Provost Marshal General's Office, authorized the use of prisoner labor in the agricultural sector and non-military industries. For their labor, the prisoners received 80 cents a day in canteen coupons, equivalent to the basic pay of American enlisted men. Detailed information about these labor programs is carefully preserved in Record Group 389 of the National Archives, testifying to an unusual episode in the history of wartime captivity. In the heart of Texas, on the vast expanse of the renowned King Ranch near Kingsville, German prisoners of war encountered the phenomenon of American agriculture, whose scale surpassed their European understanding. This immense estate, sprawling over 825,000 acres, was larger than the entire state of Rhode Island. Archival records of the ranch, covering the period from 1943 to 1945, indicate that German prisoners worked alongside Mexican-American vaqueros and African-American laborers, engaging in livestock farming. This experience of racial mixing in labor, though socially limited, stood in stark contrast to Nazi theories of racial hierarchy. In their letters, which were subject to military censorship, the prisoners expressed astonishment at the level of mechanization in American agriculture. One combine easily replaced the labor of dozens of workers, and trucks, having supplanted horse-drawn wagons, ensured rapid transport of harvests. The ranch even utilized small civilian aircraft to survey cattle herds and quickly locate stray animals. According to hiring records, Richard Kleberg Jr., the ranch manager, treated the German POWs as temporary workers, not enemies. At cotton gins across Texas, including facilities in Taylor, Caldwell, and Waller counties, POWs witnessed the incredible speed of cotton processing, unattainable by European standards. The Hearn Cotton Oil Mill, where POW labor was used from August 1943 to December 1945, processed more cotton in a day than German textile factories did in an entire month. Workers enjoyed regular breaks, full meals, and the opportunity to listen to the radio while working. Such high productivity, achieved through decent treatment rather than strict discipline, starkly differed from the order prevalent in the Wehrmacht. Prisoners were also surprised that American farmers openly discussed political issues. FBI reports, declassified in the 1970s, indicate that German POWs were shocked by how freely farmers criticized President Roosevelt, expressing dissatisfaction with government policies without the slightest fear. In one documented case on a farm near Bryan, Texas, a farmer cursed a USDA inspector during a dispute over crop distribution. The farmer faced no punishment. Such defiance of authority in Nazi Germany would have inevitably led to the death penalty. The Texas press closely followed the lives of German POWs in the American heartland, documenting their contacts with the local population. Publications such as the Hearn Democrat, Bryan Daily Eagle, and Temple Daily Telegram regularly reported on the prisoners' daily work and their interactions with ordinary Americans. These reports, which have survived from those years, bear witness to the cultural shock experienced by German soldiers finding themselves in an unfamiliar environment. In December 1943, the Hearn Democrat reported on German POWs under escort doing their Christmas shopping. However, it was American youth that made the greatest impression on them. Young men and women, without any supervision, gathered at drugstores around soda fountains. They danced to the rhythms of jazz and swing, music that Nazi propaganda had branded as degenerate Negro art. The young people, despite wartime, sported fashionable clothes, showing not the slightest interest in the militarization so characteristic of youth in totalitarian regimes. The behavior of American women particularly astonished the prisoners. They drove trucks at the Hearn Cotton Gin, ran businesses on Main Street, and managed crews of male workers in defense plants. At the nearby Bryan Airfield, women pilots, participants in the WASP, Women Air Force Service Pilots program, took combat aircraft into the sky. Archival documents confirm that these brave aviators were based at Bryan Airfield from 1943 to 1944, and German POWs working in the vicinity could not have failed to see them. In Robertson County, Texas, local churches displayed unusual tolerance, inviting German prisoners of war to their services. Documents from the First Baptist Church of Herne, the First Methodist Church, and St. Mary's Catholic Church attest to regular attendance by captured German soldiers. The Herne Democrat reported on December 24, 1943, that German POWs attended Christmas services in several churches, sitting side by side with parishioners whose sons were fighting on the fronts of World War II. Notably, no incidents were recorded during these visits. By early 1944, the Provost Marshal General's office launched a large-scale educational program at Camp Herne, disguised as voluntary training. Declassified documents from Record Group 389 reveal the details of the secret re-education program. The camp library, which began with 500 books donated by Herne residents, grew to over 5,000 volumes by August 1944. The American Library Association's Books for Prisoners program provided a wide range of literature, including works by German authors banned by the Nazi regime. Among the available books were Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, Erich Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front, and works by Jewish writers such as Leon Feuchtwanger. Thus, German POWs had the opportunity to read books for which possession in Nazi Germany could have meant the death penalty. Sam Houston State Teachers College, now Sam Houston State University, offered correspondence courses to the prisoners. Between 1944 and 1945, 340 German POWs enrolled in courses covering subjects such as English, American history, mathematics, and agricultural sciences. College faculty visited Camp Herne monthly to deliver lectures and administer exams, providing prisoners with an opportunity to receive an education while in captivity. It is necessary to clarify the issue of the POW camp press. While the newspaper Der Ruf was indeed published at Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, the prisoners of Camp Herne produced their own periodical called Der Spiegel, which translates to The Mirror. It is important to note that this newspaper has no connection to the well-known German news magazine that appeared later. An examination of preserved copies of Der Spiegel, housed at the Army Heritage and Education Center, reveals an interesting evolution of views, reflected on its pages from overt Nazi propaganda in early 1943 issues to democratic discussions by late 1944. Declassified documents from the Special Projects Division reveal details of meticulously designed psychological operations conducted in POW camps. As part of this program, all prisoners were divided into three main categories: convinced anti-Nazis, approximately 10%, political prisoners, approximately 75%, and fervent supporters of Nazi ideology, approximately 15%. A specific approach was applied to each of these groups, aimed at maximizing the alteration of their beliefs. Thus, anti-Nazi prisoners, identified through careful analysis of their letters, conversations, and reading preferences, received additional benefits and educational opportunities. They were promoted to leadership positions in the barracks, made moderators of discussion groups, and editors of camp newspapers. Their influence on the apolitical prisoners was diligently cultivated and constantly monitored. A meticulously designed selection system, developed by Army psychologists in collaboration with German immigrant consultants, employed subtle assessment methods. The prisoners' reactions to news of Germany's military setbacks, their choices of library literature, their level of engagement in educational initiatives, and the nature of their social interactions were all scrupulously documented. weekly report served to monitor changes in ideological attitudes among the camp's population. Major Maxwell McKnight, Assistant Executive Director, whose archival materials are held at the Hoover Institution, noted in a November 1944 report, "The speed of change exceeds the most optimistic forecasts. Approximately 60% of prisoners, previously politically inactive, show tangible progress in adopting democratic values after 6 months of exposure to the American way of life and targeted educational influence. Working in American factories exposed prisoners of war to a scene of unprecedented abundance that seemed to mock Germany's scarcity. At the Alcoa aluminum plant in Rockdale, Texas, where POWs had been engaged in material handling since September 1943, the amount of aluminum waste discarded by workers in a single day exceeded the quantities German aircraft factories could acquire in an entire week. According to factory documentation, German POWs were assigned to collect scrap metal, allowing them to witness firsthand the scale of America's industrial surplus. Visiting food processing plants was a genuine shock. At the Stokely Brothers Cannery in Cameron, Texas, which, according to Milam County archival documents, utilized POW labor from the nearby Herne camp, something unimaginable occurred. Vast quantities of perfectly edible produce were ruthlessly destroyed due to minor, purely cosmetic defects. Slightly unripe tomatoes, corn cobs with uneven rows of kernels, beans with small blemishes, all were discarded, while civilians in Germany suffered from hunger. A letter from Corporal Friedrich Müller, who was held captive and whose words are preserved in the Red Cross archives, reads, "Today we destroyed hundreds of pounds of fruit simply because they did not meet high canning standards. What would be a priceless treasure in Germany is thrown away here." The American supervisor apologized to us for this unthinkable waste, not realizing he was apologizing for an abundance we couldn't even imagine. The Christmas 1943 celebration at Herne Camp was extensively documented in local press, Red Cross reports, and military records. The entire town of Herne, with only 2,000 residents, united to provide enemy soldiers with a dignified Christmas celebration. This act of kindness toward enemies seemed to contradict all the harsh realities of the wartime. The December 23, 1943, issue of the Herne Democrat newspaper published a detailed report on donations collected by local residents for the German POWs held at the camp. Local religious communities gathered an impressive 4,800 individual gift packages. Educational institutions showed creativity, making handmade greeting cards and festive decorations. Even World War I veterans from American Legion, Post Number 164, who once fought against Germans, demonstrated generosity by donating cigarettes, sweets, and sports equipment to their current adversaries. The Lions Club provided musical instruments for the prisoners' entertainment. The Garden Club adorned the campgrounds with holly branches and evergreens, creating a festive atmosphere. A massive 30-foot Christmas tree, erected in the camp's main square, was the centerpiece of the holiday decorations. A photograph of this tree, adorned with bright electric lights, appeared in the newspaper. According to quartermaster records, the electricity consumption for Christmas lighting at the camp exceeded that of most German villages, which would have been unimaginable even in peacetime Germany itself. Local churches organized Christmas concerts in German to delight the prisoners. The choir of the First Methodist Church, under the direction of Mrs. Sarah Patterson, whose son was fighting in Italy at the time, learned German Christmas carols, pronouncing the words phonetically. This act of American mothers singing for enemy soldiers, while their own sons fought Germans on the front lines, evoked strong emotions in some POWs, plunging them into a state of cognitive dissonance. The Christmas feast at the prisoner of war camp was a true banquet amidst the grim reality of wartime. The menu, meticulously recorded by the quartermaster's office, was astonishing in its abundance. Roasted turkey, generously allocated at £1 per person, fragrant ham, candied sweet potatoes, tender green beans, hearty cornbread stuffing, piquant cranberry sauce, sweet fruit cake, and classic apple pie. Refreshing ice cream concluded this gastronomic celebration. Enlisted men received beer, while officers enjoyed exquisite Californian wine. The total caloric intake of this feast reached a remarkable 5,000 calories per person. At the same time, German civilians, if they could obtain anything at all, subsisted on a meager 100 to 200 calories per day. Their stay in Texas opened the eyes of German prisoners of war to the complex American racial structure, which completely contradicted both Nazi propaganda and common perceptions of America. The reality, reflected in military reports and local newspapers, proved to be far more multifaceted than any simplified narratives. At Herne Camp, black soldiers from the 359th Infantry Regiment often served as guards. German POWs, raised in the spirit of Nazi racial theory, found themselves subordinate to black Americans. Some attempted to request transfers to avoid being commanded by an inferior race, but the camp administration firmly rejected all such requests. Lieutenant Colonel Stiles stated clearly in his December 1943 report, "German prisoner objections to Negro guards noted and ignored." However, despite strict regulations, the prisoners could not help but notice the profound contradictions permeating American society at the time. Situations often arose where German prisoners enjoyed privileges unavailable to African Americans serving in the U.S. Army. They could freely visit Herne chain restaurants, while the black soldiers guarding them were denied entry. German POWs were allowed to attend cinemas, where their African American guards were prohibited from sitting in the orchestra section. This paradoxical contrast, where enemies were granted more social freedoms than black American citizens, deeply undermined ideological certainty, especially in agricultural settings. As documented by the Farm Security Administration, prisoners of war worked side by side with Mexican and African American laborers, vividly demonstrating the absurdity of racial prejudices. The efficiency of mixed crews, where professional skills, not racial background, were prioritized, called into question the Nazi theory that racial purity was a guarantee of high productivity. German prisoners of war picking cotton shoulder to shoulder with black laborers, observed in practice that the latter surpassed them in productivity, which completely debunked the myth of racial superiority. History offers numerous examples of astonishing metamorphoses experienced by German prisoners of war on American soil. 3 vivid cases, supported by documented evidence, reveal the depth of this transformation. Hermann Berger, who arrived at Herne Camp in June 1943 with an unwavering belief in Nazi ideals, describes in his memoirs the gradual erosion of his ideological convictions under the influence of what he saw and experienced. The culmination of this transformation occurred at Christmas 1943, when the residents of Herne displayed unprecedented kindness, showering the enemy prisoners with gifts. Berger wrote, These people, whose sons were fighting against us, gave us tokens of attention. Their generosity was a display not of weakness, but of strength, the confidence of victors who realized they had already triumphed not only in the war, but also in building a peaceful future. Subsequently, in 1953, Berger decided to immigrate to America, and in 1958 he became a full citizen of the country. Before his retirement, he worked as an engineer for General Motors. Georg Gertner, choosing freedom over captivity, made a daring escape from the Deming camp in New Mexico in September 1945. For 40 years, he lived under the assumed name Dennis Wiles. Instead of seeking refuge outside America, he chose to remain in the country illegally, marrying an American woman, starting a family, and working as a tennis instructor in sunny California. It was only in 1985, after agreeing to participate in a documentary film, that he voluntarily surrendered to authorities. By then, he had lived in America longer than in his homeland. His story, chronicled in his autobiography, Hitler's Last Soldier in America, serves as compelling proof of the transformative power of American society, capable of changing even the most ingrained beliefs. The story of Reinhold Peel, a German prisoner of war who escaped from a camp in Washington, Illinois in 1945, is a unique case where the motive for escape was not harsh treatment, but rather a longing for adventure and an interest in American culture. In his memoirs titled Enemies Are People Too, he describes his 7 years of illegal life in Chicago, where he worked in bookstores and even married an American woman. In 1953, Piel voluntarily surrendered to authorities, and an FBI investigation found no legal violations other than illegal entry into the country. Subsequently, in 1959, he obtained American citizenship and became successful in business, later providing support to other German immigrants. The fates of German prisoners of war held in over 500 camps across the United States varied, but several common trends can be identified. At Alva Camp, Oklahoma, an agricultural training program was organized. According to the Department of Agriculture, German POWs managed a 200-acre demonstration farm, employing advanced American farming methods. Prisoners learned mechanized cultivation, crop rotation, soil conservation techniques, and hybrid seed breeding. The knowledge gained proved extremely useful when the POWs returned to Germany, which lay in ruins after the war. The success of the agricultural program at Alva Camp was so great that local farmers eagerly hired POW teams to work on their fields, leading to competition for labor among the prisoners. In Kansas, Concordia Camp became renowned for its outstanding art program. Talented German prisoners of war left behind impressive murals that can still be seen today in the Stone County Courthouse and several other local structures. The camp orchestra, generously provided with musical instruments by Kansas residents, regularly gave concerts for the general public. The local newspaper, Concordia Blade, consistently praised these performances, highlighting the high professionalism of the musicians despite their POW status. The artworks created by the prisoners became valuable assets and now form the basis of permanent collections in various Kansas museums. At the Trinidad camp, located in Colorado, harsh winter conditions presented specific challenges. Temperatures here often drop to 20 degrees to 29 degrees C. According to quartermaster's office documents, the army provided German prisoners of war with warm Arctic-style clothing, insulated barracks, and increased rations, reaching 4,000 calories per day during winter. Swiss inspector André Poncho, who visited the camp in February 1944, noted in his report, "German prisoners in Trinidad receive winter clothing and food of better quality than Wehrmacht soldiers on the Eastern Front." The prisoners themselves admit this. Perhaps nothing astonished the German soldiers as much as the striking openness of the American information system. Prisoners had the opportunity to read American newspapers, which did not shy away from criticizing the course of military operations, identifying flaws in production processes, and analyzing strategic miscalculations. A special department deliberately provided a wide range of informational resources, understanding that exposure to the principles of a free press could dismantle a totalitarian worldview. Radio broadcasts, transmitted in recreation areas, contained commentary that criticized military leadership. Famous comedians such as Bob Hope openly ridiculed generals and politicians. Journalists like Edward R. Murrow questioned chosen strategies. Congress openly debated army funding, and various viewpoints were broadcast nationwide. And all of this was accessible to enemy prisoners of war. The 1944 presidential election campaign, observed from the camps, seemed to German military minds an act of democratic self-destruction. Roosevelt faced a serious challenge from Thomas Dewey in the midst of war. Republicans criticized the management of military operations. Alternative opinions were published in newspapers. Political cartoons ridiculed the commander-in-chief. Nevertheless, military efforts continued and even gained momentum. This demonstration of democracy's strength, manifesting through disagreement rather than despite it, fundamentally undermined authoritarian beliefs. Archives of the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, in Geneva contain inspection reports that unanimously attest that American prisoner of war camps not only met but exceeded the standards established by the Geneva Convention. These independent assessments serve as undeniable confirmation of the decent conditions in the camps. For instance, Inspector Guy Metro, in his comprehensive report from August 1944, emphasized that American camps in all aspects exceed treaty requirements. He noted that the camp diet was equivalent to, or even surpassed, the rations of American soldiers. Medical care was on par with American military hospitals. Furthermore, educational and recreational opportunities surpassed many American military installations. As a specific example, the results of the Herne camp inspection can be cited. Daily caloric intake ranged from 3,300 to 3,800, significantly exceeding the minimum 2,000 calories stipulated by the Geneva Convention. Each prisoner was allotted 3.7 square meters of living space, whereas the convention required only 2.5 square meters. Medical staff consisted of one doctor per 500 prisoners, which was double the standard set by the convention. Additionally, the camp organized sports activities, libraries, and educational programs, ensuring comprehensive recreation for the prisoners of war, as prescribed by the Convention. Inspector Emil Sandström, having the opportunity to personally assess prisoner of war conditions in various countries, concluded the unconditional superiority of the American system. After visiting camps in Canada, Great Britain, and Australia, he emphasized that American facilities not only provided a high level of material well-being, but also demonstrated a fundamentally different approach to treating prisoners. According to the inspector, in the US, they were treated not as sworn enemies, but as individuals temporarily deprived of freedom. This humane approach, combined with unique labor organization methods, led to astonishing results at American enterprises where prisoners of war worked. A prime example is the Lonier Steel Plant in Daingerfield, Texas. Here, from 1944 to 1945, prisoners from Herne Camp were employed. Thanks to their efforts, the plant's monthly production volume exceeded the pre-war annual output of the entire Ruhr Valley, Germany's industrial heartland. The secret of this phenomenon lay not only in advanced equipment, but also in the high motivation of the workers. Company archival documents indicate that workers actively participated in competitions for production bonuses, submitted innovative proposals, and were genuinely proud of their products. Visual charts displaying the results of each shift resembled sports scoreboards. Workers proudly wore company badges, purchased war bonds with their overtime earnings, and even inscribed the names of bombers on steel intended for the front lines. Thus, high morale, bolstered by material incentives, proved to be a far more effective tool for increasing productivity than strict supervision. At Texas railroad hubs, where prisoners of war were engaged in loading various materials, the seamlessness of the processes astonished even experienced German officers responsible for logistics. The Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad Company actively involved POWs in working at its station in Smithville, where they witnessed firsthand the efficiency of the American supply system. Trains arrived precisely on time, loading equipment operated without interruption, and telegraph and telephone communications ensured nationwide transportation coordination. And all this, surprisingly, without a single central planning body, simply a capitalist system, self-organizing to meet the needs of war production. When Germany collapsed in the spring of 1945, American leadership began preparing prisoners of war for their return to their ravaged homeland. This preparation, as occupation planning documents attest, was not limited to simple repatriation. The War Department launched Project Paperclip for scientists and also developed large-scale programs to prepare prisoners of war for participation in rebuilding a democratic Germany. In civil administration courses, POWs were trained in managing destroyed cities. Agricultural courses focused on teaching methods for providing food to a starving population. Medical personnel studied methods of epidemic prevention and public health. Engineers familiarized themselves with infrastructure restoration technologies. A special department identified potential leaders of the democratic movement among the prisoners, providing them with in-depth training in management and administration. The scope of this preparation is meticulously documented in the General Commandant's reports. By the spring of 1945, a massive educational effort was underway in prisoner of war camps. 31,000 individuals were learning various trades. 18,000 were studying English, 12,000 were involved in agricultural programs, 8,500 attended technical courses, and 6,200 were mastering the fundamentals of business management. Remarkably, the concepts of the future Marshall Plan were presented to the prisoners even before their official publication. State Department representatives visited the camps, explaining American policy aimed at Germany's reconstruction, not its punishment. This unprecedented generosity of the victor towards the vanquished shattered the last strongholds of Nazi ideology concerning racial struggle and the survival of the fittest. Statistical data vividly demonstrates the scale of the transformation. Of the 425,000 German POWs held in America, only 2,122 escape attempts were recorded, 0.52%. Furthermore, only 54 successful escapes lasted longer than 30 days, or 0.01%. Cases of sabotage were isolated, with only 7 confirmed incidents, 0.1%. Refusals to work were also extremely rare, with 178 documented cases, 0.04%. At the same time, 87% of eligible prisoners voluntarily participated in work. Post-war surveys conducted by American occupation authorities revealed that 74% of returning POWs held a positive view of American democracy. 61% supported the Marshall Plan after its announcement. 55% advocated for a German-American alliance. 38% expressed a desire to immigrate to America, and 23% maintained correspondence with American families. Immigration archives indicate that approximately 5,000 former POWs legally moved to America in the 1950s. Naturalization data shows that 92% of them became US citizens within the established time frame. Their successful adaptation in America, assessed by employment levels, housing security, and lack of criminal records, surpassed that of the general immigrant population. The impact of former German POWs who returned from American captivity on the post-war reconstruction of West Germany is corroborated by numerous documents preserved in occupation records and German archives. These individuals, having experienced American captivity, assumed key positions in the nascent West German democracy, bringing with them new knowledge and perspectives. According to archival data, 48 former POWs became members of the Bundestag, contributing to the legislative process and shaping the country's political direction. Over 300 individuals served as mayors or city council members, directly participating in urban governance and reconstruction. Approximately 2,000 people were involved in modernizing agriculture, implementing new methods and technologies to boost productivity. More than 2,300 former POWs taught in rebuilt schools, shaping the future generation of Germans based on democratic values. Over 4,000 individuals managed businesses, successfully applying American approaches to management and production organization. Hans-Georg von Studnitz, who experienced American captivity and later became a successful German industrialist, emphasized that former POWs brought back from America not only memories, but also an understanding of the principles of democracy, free markets, and international cooperation. They had witnessed a working model for the future and sought to implement it in their own country. Although Camp Herne ceased to exist in December 1945, the connections between former prisoners and their American counterparts endured for decades. The Herne Heritage League maintained archives of former POW correspondence for 40 years. Annual Christmas cards continued to arrive until the death of the last known prisoner in 2001, attesting to a profound and lasting transformation, not a fleeting influence. In 1984, on the 40th anniversary of the D-Day landings, about 50 former Camp Herne POWs returned to Texas to meet with their former guards and American friends. The Herne Democrat newspaper extensively covered the event, capturing poignant moments as former enemies embraced and shared memories. Wehrmacht veterans laid flowers at the American Legion Memorial, paying tribute to their former adversaries. Fritz Zimmermann, speaking on behalf of the group, emphasized that they came to America as enemies, believing in racial superiority and national destiny, but left as friends who realized that the chaos of democracy is its strength, and that diversity creates, rather than weakens, unity. This visit symbolized reconciliation and served as a testament to how the American captivity experience contributed to the formation of a new democratic worldview among former German soldiers. The experience of German POWs in America has been reliably documented by historians. Arnold Kramer's work, Nazi Prisoners of War in America, published in 1979, provides an exhaustive account. Judith Gunsberg, in her 1977 book Stalag USA, analyzes the re-education program. Antonio Thompson's Men in German Uniforms, published in 2010, examines prisoner labor programs. Ron Robbins' College Behind Barbed Wire, published in 1995, details the educational transformation. These academic studies, based on archival materials, interviews, and government documents, confirm the scale and success of this transformation. The general consensus is that America's treatment of German POWs represents history's most successful example of re-education achieved through exposure to reality rather than through ideological indoctrination. German POWs who arrived in America between 1943 and 1946 witnessed events that seemed unthinkable from the perspective of their worldview. Every freedom shown, every act of kindness, every unexpected generosity gradually accumulated, leading to an ideological upheaval. They expected to see a weak and fragmented nation. Instead, they discovered a society so self-confident that it could afford to show mercy to its enemies. This transformation was achieved not by propaganda, but by reality itself. German POWs witnessed how democracy functions despite apparent chaos. They observed progress in racial integration, even amidst lingering segregation. They saw women demonstrate strength without losing their femininity. They experienced how enemies became friends through simple humanity. These unusual phenomena, commonplace for Americans, but revolutionary for those raised under totalitarianism, achieved what military defeat alone could not: a complete ideological transformation. The prisoners who entered American camps not only encountered the formidable power of the United States, but also experienced American values firsthand. They did not merely observe democratic processes, they became direct participants. America's greatest triumph was not victory on the battlefield, but the transformation that occurred in the prisoner of war camps, where former enemies, through their exposure to American reality, became its proponents. The astonishing phenomena that struck them were unusual only for those raised under tyranny. For Americans, it was everyday life, chaotic, imperfect, yet full of freedom. German POWs arriving in America expected to see enemies, but instead they saw an example of what they themselves could become. These striking changes affected not only individuals, but also influenced the destinies of entire nations. In their astonished perception lay the seeds of the future Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and the democratic rebirth of Europe. Their transformation proved that the most significant victories are achieved not through destruction, but through demonstrating advantages, not with propaganda, but through reality, not through hatred, but through the manifestation of humanity. The unusual phenomena witnessed by German POWs in America form the basis of one of history's most successful transformations of an enemy into an ally.